Welcome to this online workshop, How to Create a Successful, No-Stress Sensory Diet in 4 Simple Steps. As you guys know, we are the Sensory Solutions team. I'm Wendy Burtnall, and I will be presenting this with Alicia Grogan. So before we do anything else, we want to make sure that we are helping you make this worth your while. You've carved out the time to listen to this today, and we want to make sure it comes through in the best way possible for you. So to do that, we want you to make sure you silence your phone, forget about multitasking, and close all other programs to keep the webinar running faster. So if you have other tabs on your computer, it can really slow down the quality of this video. So keep those closed, and if at all possible, close out all other internet connections that you have going in the house. Like if other people are on Netflix or running any other kind of internet thing, if you can close those down, it'll help this come through a lot better.
And we also want to tell you about a special bonus that we'll be telling you about right at the end of the workshop. It's Taming Tantrums, and it's Wendy's new book. We'll be telling you about how to get your hands on that today only during the workshop when we tell you about our full sensory solutions class. We will also be answering some common questions that we get at the very end, so you want to make sure that you stick around for that because there's always some extra tips and tidbits in that section for you. Before we get started, though, we want to talk about if you're in the right place. We know that many of you have found your way here for a variety of different reasons, because the truth is that sensory is a really big topic and everybody's understanding of it is a little bit different. So if you find yourself just starting to wonder if the challenges that your child is facing, or maybe some of the odd behaviors that they have, or some of the needs that you think they have might be linked to this thing called sensory, you're in the right place. You're going to have a really clear sense of that after this workshop and understand sensory in a much better way. You're also in the right place if you think a sensory diet might help your child. So you may know that your child has sensory needs, but you're not really sure what a sensory diet is or how to get one into place for your child that is going to work, or why you should even use one. You're going to have a really clear idea of that as well by the end of this workshop. So don't worry, you are also in the right place. And lastly, if you already have been trying to put a sensory diet in place, maybe from an OT, maybe from piecing together activities on your own all over the internet, and you're feeling really overwhelmed and frustrated, this is also going to help you. As we walk through these 4 steps, you're going to feel really confident in applying a sensory diet in your home as well.
So now that you guys know that you're in the right place, I just have to say we are so honored to have you here. And before we move forward, we want to take a minute to debunk the 2 most common myths that prevent most people from moving forward and supporting their child's sensory needs. So let's take a quick minute here, and I want you to think about, what do people usually say to you when they see your child's behaviors that are probably linked to sensory, whether it's the picky eating or the sensory meltdowns, or maybe it's just your child avoiding certain social situations. What are the things that people are telling you? These are probably the most common myths that we will find, and we really want to make sure that we're going to address them. So the first one that we're going to cover is that, oh, the kids will just grow out of it. People say all the time, oh, it's just a phase. Your child's just in the terrible twos, or they're just going to learn. The reaction to a sensory need or aversion is actually not a phase. We want to tell you that right now. So the reality is that kids can learn how to address their sensory needs, or even better, those sensory needs can actually improve. Those outcomes, though, can only happen when sensory activities are used strategically and intentionally, which is what we're going to teach you here. So the second myth, tell me if this came up for you guys, is that their behavior is just a result of bad parenting. Maybe you just need to be more strict, or maybe you just need to push a little harder. Now, I can say, as parents, we're all famous for taking the blame for bad behavior. But when it comes to sensory, it is absolutely positively not true. So we want to take that load off your shoulders right now. We all have sensory preferences. Every single person does. Some are just more intense than others. And those ones that are more intense need to be addressed with support and education, which is exactly what you're doing here. So we really hope this helps you feel like you are in the right place and that you are in a position to be supported.
Yes, and knowing those myths is really important because they can really stop you from moving forward with the 4 steps that we're going to teach you today. You can really get hung up on those and you will have a very difficult time making progress. Because we believe that these 4 steps are the heart of the support that Wendy is talking about. And creating a sensory diet that really works lies in each one of these manageable steps. Because they give you a step-by-step roadmap of exactly how and when to help your child. These steps can and have changed lives because once your child's sensory needs are met, they are able to do life better. And when I say do life better, I mean everything that encompasses their day, whether that's focusing or learning, eating, sleeping, playing, communicating with you and their peers. They can do all of those things better when their sensory needs are met. So what are you going to learn today? Well, these 4 steps are really the heart of what a sensory diet is for Wendy and I. Let's take a look at specifically what they are.
So first, we're just going to outline these steps. Then in a couple minutes, we'll go much deeper into them and explain exactly what they are. So the first step is to target the behavior. Now, we want to clarify, when we say behavior, we're talking about any kind of action. So it could be anything from an extreme meltdown to just quietly withdrawing when there's too much noise. All of that is going to be considered behavior because it's the certain thing that tells us that something is off. So then we go to step 2. After we've identified the behavior, then we want to look at which sensory system is contributing to this behavior, which sensory system is off, and identifying what that is.
And then the third step is providing support. So this is where the tools, the strategies, and the sensory activities come into play. And you only bring this in once you understand what sensory system needs support and how that links up to the behavior. And then the last step, we really talk about how to create a plan that works for you. And this is really what the sensory diet's original intent was. It's about creating a plan that really meets your child's sensory needs day in and day out. So we're going to talk a lot more about how that can be doable for you. But we also want you to know that despite sensory diet being in the very title of this workshop, it's not really our favorite word because diet has a negative connotation to it. It sounds strict and it sounds rigid. And we're going to show you exactly how it doesn't have to be that way. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, how do we know that these 4 steps are so successful? Well, truthfully, it all began with our backgrounds. You may already know that Wendy is a special ed teacher, and I'm a pediatric OT that specializes in sensory processing. But for Wendy, her path to knowing exactly what it meant to manage a sensory child in daily life was a lot more close to home.
So some of you might already know that I have a child with sensory differences, but that isn't something that I've always known. When my second son was born, at that time I had spent 5 years teaching special ed. I had my master's degree in special education, and I was working with OTs regularly. So I really felt like I had a handle on this behavior thing, and I had a handle on this sensory thing. But what I didn't realize was that I didn't know why sensory worked. I didn't know when to use sensory activities or how to identify sensory differences in my own home. So this is when I actually became obsessed with sensory. It was one day when I was reading a book about sensory processing because I wanted to help my kids in my class. And at the time, my son was about 3 years old, and we were having a really rough time with his tantrums and meltdowns and just really not understanding him. And I remember specifically that day, as I was reading the book about sensory, I had tears streaming down my face as I realized that everything I read described my son perfectly. And all this time, it had been there in front of me, and I didn't even know it. So at that point in time, my desire to learn more about sensory and how it worked in the home became a 3-year obsession to help my own kid and the struggles that we had in our own home. So that's when roots really started taking hold for me personally. It was then that I was able to take everything that I'd learned from the classroom, from working with occupational therapists so closely, and I had to tweak it and make it work in my home with my own kid. It's different when we're the parent. And that's exactly what I learned. And that's when I decided to start a blog to help other parents who are on this same journey that I was on, to be a support for them.
Meanwhile, in my life, I was working in school settings, clinics, and in people's homes. I was incredibly fortunate to get advanced sensory trainings and work under some sensory gurus. Seeing the huge changes sensory could have in the kids' lives I was working with fueled my passion for sensory in a big way. But I was still surprised when my second son was born. And around 6 months, I noticed some pretty big sensory red flags in regards to his eating, the fact that he actually had no interest to eat, and that he did not want to be messy. We worked through that, and not that it was easy, but I was even more surprised to find over the next few years all the ways his sensory needs had trickled into so many aspects of his life. And my son does not have an SPD diagnosis or any sort of diagnosis at all. He certainly has more sensory needs, though, than anyone else in my family. And when I started to look at the way he was acting and the things that he was doing through a sensory lens, I was really able to help him instead of being tempted to call him wild or bad, or maybe even just that he was being a typical middle child. And some of the people in my life were definitely giving him this label to try to explain just some of his more unusual behaviors, especially compared to my other two children. It was around this time that I started my own blog, right when his sensory needs were unfolding in our life. You know, I really wanted to also share all of the tips and the strategies that a lot of people just weren't talking about. I wanted to make it practical and doable for people. And that was the birth of Your Kids Table. But fast forward a couple years, Wendy and I crossed paths, and we really wanted to dig deeper into helping parents with sensory in a much bigger way, other than just a tip or a strategy here or there. So we started working with parents online and developed this 4-step system that we saw emerge out of our helping them, because we were striving to make this sensory diet really doable for parents. And again, thinking about a sensory diet as something that could be life-changing, something that was really going to help their kids day in and day out. And that's exactly what happened for one of our students. Her son was Joey, and before she learned our system for a sensory diet with these 4 steps, her son was having lots of tantrums, meltdowns all the time. They weren't even really sure why those were happening. They weren't sure if they were part of typical development, but they did know that it was disrupting their family life. Their marriage was even a little strained as a result of it, because everything was revolving around Joey. But once they started applying the 4 steps that we're going to teach you today, they started to see an immediate turnaround. Joey started to seek out help in new ways because the connection and the understanding was there in a way that it had never been before. And miraculously, or so it seemed, Joey started to be able to go to social events, to play with his peers. And one of the biggest compliments that we've ever received is that their marriage started to improve. And this all happened in a really short amount of time. The steps that you're going to learn today will be the difference between being overwhelmed by odd behaviors or meltdowns and other quirks, and actually understanding why they happen and how to address them. This is how you help your sensory child.
So let's get into the steps. I'm sure you guys are all antsy and ready to dive into this. So let's get started. When we talk about targeting the behavior, what we want to understand first is that behavior is really just a form of communication. So before a kid can say, "Hey mom, my sensory system is off," they express their sensory needs through behavior, because that's what comes naturally to them. So if that behavior or the call for help is then ignored or punished, that need continues to go unmet, and the only option is for that behavior to get bigger or louder or more obnoxious. So no matter what you do, that behavior is going to continue. Does this sound familiar to any of you guys? If so, we want you to write this thing down. This is one of my favorite quotes from Ross Greene, who's the author of The Explosive Child, and he says, "Kids do well when they can." This hit me like a ton of bricks because I see it so often. I saw it in the classroom and I see it with my own kids. Sensory behavior is not a willful decision to be naughty or particular or really wild, like Alicia was saying. It's not a decision. It's honestly just a call for help to be able to cope with the environment they're in. So that places our job as showing up as a supporter to them so that they can do well. So let's look at what this looks like. When the sensory system is off, we see behavior. Behavior happens when any of these cups are off. So if we think of our sensory system as being a series of 7 cups, some of them are small, some of them are large, and they can only handle so much sensation or stimulation inside of them. The small cup, if it overflows, a child is going to try to avoid that type of input. A large cup, if it's underfilled, a child is going to constantly be seeking more input to try to fill that cup. And it's when we have the cup just right, like the one in the middle, when our brain feels like, okay, everything is fine, I'm good, and I don't need to divert all of my energy to filling or avoiding anything. And that's when we see the most regulated behavior, is when everything is normalized. So how do we make this work for you? We deal, as parents and teachers and caregivers, we deal with the same behaviors every single day, which is, it feels exhausting and seems like there's absolutely no hope until you start looking at it through a sensory lens. Just like Alicia was talking about with her son, looking at the behaviors with a sensory lens she was able to see it in a different light. This is what happened with a former student of ours named Ashley. She had really felt like she was starting to see all the sensory needs behind her son's behavior. So she told us, she said, I started making the connections with how some of my son's weird habits were affected by sensory. Now it all just makes sense. I can see the sensory reasons behind it. Before, I felt like I just had a weird kid that was really frustrating, but now I see all the sensory reasons behind it. And that's what we want for each one of you.
Okay, so that brings us to step 2, identifying the sensory system. And what we want really to highlight here for you is that any behavior could be really anything. Behavior, that word has such a negative connotation to it, but we want you to think that that could be your child not wanting to walk on the grass with their bare feet. That could be a behavior, as well as your child hitting their brother. That could also be a behavior. It's a wide spectrum. So basically anything that you see your child doing, we want you to look at that and then take a step back and tie it to which sensory system that might be related to. So this is just like checking under the hood of a car when you're having problems to see what exactly needs addressed. So to do that, we need to think of the 7 senses. These are all 7 of our senses. Now, you may have only heard of the first 5 listed there, and we're going to pull out the 6th and 7th sense and talk about those in some more detail in just a minute. But before we go there, I want you to look at each one of these senses and remember how Wendy just told us to think of each one of them as a cup. So there's a vision cup and a hearing cup and a smelling cup and so on. And your child may have a sensory need with any one of these or multiple cups at any given time. And when one of these cups is either trying to get input out of it because it's overflowing and it's too full, or they're trying to fill it up because there's not enough in there, then it may have a ripple effect through the other senses. So it's something important to keep in mind. So this does require some detective work, some digging to find out what's going on. For instance, imagine if you are out in your yard and you're pulling some weeds and you accidentally put your hand on a big gooey slug and you're not expecting that. Okay, now that probably sent your tactile system to overflow. Your cup is really overflowing right now, unless like the slimy, gooey slug doesn't bother you. But for most people, that probably does. So your tactile system is now overflowing. You may also close your eyes. You may pull your body inwards to protect yourself a little bit because it's just so much input. You might be even shielding your eyes. You may try to go in the house to just get away from all of the other sensory input that you're experiencing at that time, even though it is just your touch system that has been affected and is overflowing. And we see this commonly with our children and the sensations that they're experiencing, the input that they're getting to their systems. So what we want you to do here is to really try to zone in and target when you see that behavior, try to figure out which one of these senses is being addressed. For those first 5 senses, you probably have a lot of the skills to be able to do that. So just like, having smelling something a lot, complaining about smells. Again, another example of a cup that's overflowing. Whereas hearing, if your child is never really listening to you or not hearing you very well, or they're constantly making noise all of the time and banging things, they may be trying to fill that cup up. So let's take a look at our 6th sense, proprioception, and exactly what that looks like when the cup is trying to get more input. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you exactly what proprioception is. It's our sense of body awareness. So what does that mean exactly, right? That's kind of a therapy term. To illustrate this for you, I really want you to close your eyes right now while you're sitting there listening to this. Now hold your arm out next to your body with your finger pointed. While you keep your eyes closed, take the tip of your finger and touch it to the tip of your nose. This was pretty easy for you, I bet, right? You didn't even have to think about this. And you may be wondering why I'm having you do this activity. But it's because that was proprioception that allowed you to be able to do that so easily. Your vision was not guiding your finger to the tip of your nose. It was the receptors that are all throughout your joints and muscles, and they go throughout our whole body. Those receptors are constantly sending information to our brain to let us know where our body is so that we can get up and walk across the room, that we can climb a set of steps, basically for any movement that we need to complete. The way that we activate or get more input through proprioception is to put pressure on those receptors. And we do that anytime we walk, we jump, we climb, we crash into things, we get a hug. All those receptors get deep pressure. So if your child is seeking out those kinds of behaviors, that probably means that they are looking to fill their proprioception cup. So if you're seeing those things, you will know that that's where the need is. And these kids that are constantly seeking out jumping and crashing and climbing, what are they usually labeled as? Wild, dangerous, or aggressive. Yep. Can you guess that my son has a pretty big proprioception cup that he's trying to fill up? So our 7th sense is vestibular, and this is our sense of movement and balance. And the receptors for our vestibular system lie deep within our inner ear. And the way that we activate those receptors and put more input into our vestibular cup is through spinning and swinging. So if you're seeing your kids seeking out those kinds of activities, that means that they're looking to fill up their vestibular cup. But truly, any type of movement gives vestibular input. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we see children that might have a vestibular cup that is overflowing. And when that happens, children are very fearful of heights, may not want to be moved, they might not want to get on a swing or climb, and can have complete meltdowns over those experiences, which can be really confusing to parents when it seems like, why doesn't my child just want to be picked up and roughhoused a little bit? Or why do they not want to get on a swing? I thought all kids love swings. There's a sensory need there. So that's exactly how we're trying to show you how to look at that behavior and link it back to what sensory system is looking for help. So we want to take this a step further and give you an example. And we want you right now to just think along with us as we're going through this. We have a picture here of a shopping cart. Can you think, What sensory systems would be affected if your child is in the grocery store and sitting in the shopping cart with you? Now, there's a whole host of behaviors that we could see in a grocery store. We could see everything from your child having meltdowns, to tantrums, to touching everything, to having a difficult time listening to you, to insisting on riding in the cart or pushing the cart. So let's talk about what sensory systems could be affected. Well, your child is definitely getting a lot of visual input from the lights. They are probably hearing a lot of sounds. If it's busy in the store, they're having people come close to them. They may even be having people brush up against them. If they're pushing the cart or they're sitting in the cart, they're actually getting a lot of proprioception when they ride over bumps or they're pushing. Any kind of pushing activities give proprioceptive input as well. Now, another example is cooking dinner. So you're cooking dinner in your home and your child might start complaining, whining about various things, maybe specifically about the smell. Your child may sit down for dinner and refuse to eat their food. They may gag at their food. They may stuff tons of food into their mouth. All of these things can be linked back to their sensory needs. So it might be that their cup is overflowing because the smell is too strong. They might even be getting auditory or hearing input from the sizzling and the cooking in the pan. They may even be getting visual stimulation from just looking at the food as it cooks in the pan. And then when they get down to the table to eat, well, they could be getting taste and touch again, and then even that visual and smell again as it's right in front of their face and as they're putting it in their mouth and eating it for the first time. So now that we gave you those examples, we really want you to think about how you can make this work for you. And in the same way that we just did in these examples, we want you to look at the environments that you have in your home, the times that you're seeing those behaviors and linking them back to a sensory system. So you can already see how these steps are building on each other. This was a really important point and made a huge difference in one of our students' lives. Katie, before she learned these steps, she was just taking any sensory activity and trying it with her son because it was a sensory activity. You know, she would see all of these fantastic ideas on Pinterest and on the internet and think, well, it's sensory. I think he has sensory needs. It must help him. But she wasn't matching it up to his needs. Once she did that, she was able to see exactly what his sensory need was, what he was seeking, and how to help him. She said she was able to meet his needs easily now, and he was loving it. So this actually leads us into our next step, because now that you know what sensory system needs support, you must be able to provide that support.
And that is exactly where we start step 3 with, after seeing the behavior and targeting the sensory system, which hopefully you're a little bit more comfortable with now after Alicia took you through that great explanation of all the senses and even the little activity. So many people tell us that those are really powerful because it really helps to solidify these concepts. It seems so difficult to understand, but here Alicia just explains it so great and in a way that makes sense for everybody. So the next step is to then support that sensory system. So what we're saying is to give support to the specific sensory system. So just like Alicia was explaining, when the sensory needs are supported, it's almost magical how well things start to work out. Because if the sensory system is supported, those cups are all level, the body is not fighting against anything, trying to get more stimulation away or trying to get access to more things. And behavior doesn't have to happen. And that's when we see a lot of the frustration decreasing. The power struggles aren't necessary anymore, and there's no longer a need for all those behaviors that can be so frustrating. So how do we go about providing this support? Well, really, we have 3 tips that we like to tell people. First is look at calming versus organizing. Now, what is it, think ahead of time, what is it that you want your child's body to achieve through the specific sensory activity. Like Alicia was saying, it's not just randomly picking out sensory activities because they might be cute or look fun or whatever. We want to see what we need to achieve through that. So maybe if our child is coming home from school and is a little bit flustered and kind of out of whack a little bit, we're probably going to choose an organizing activity. Whereas if our kid is bouncing off the walls and it's time for bed, we're probably going to choose something that's more calming, like a foot rub or something like that. And activities can have different effects on our child's body, so making note of the effect that it has on the body and what it is that we're trying to achieve is the number one tip. The second tip is to go for proprioceptive activities whenever possible. Those definitely will get us the biggest bang for our buck, and that's what we're all about. We're all busy, and we don't have time to go about doing all these different things. And truly, proprioception is such a powerful sense, and proprioceptive activities tend to be very, very powerful. So going for those first is typically a good bet. And third is that support does not mean force. Now, I know that, when our kids are sick, we know that to be able to get better, their body needs medicine. And so we have to give them that medicine for their bodies to be able to get better and heal and stuff. So we would force that medication on them, and it would not be an option. But sensory doesn't work that way. When sensory is forced, it causes our kids to want to push against us as well as their sensory system. And so it actually makes things even worse. When the truth is, when the activity is right for our child, their bodies naturally are going to desire that activity. It's going to feel good, and it's going to be something that they're going to want to do. So there shouldn't ever be a time when we force, because it's probably, if we're forcing, it probably means that their body doesn't need it, or it's not the right time to introduce it. A lot of times people try to do something in the middle of a meltdown, and really that's not a fantastic idea, because in the middle of anybody's meltdown, we just need to give a kid space or go for other things. So that gets into, how do we make it work for you? Let's think about what are some of the ways that you've ended up working against the sensory system before you knew it was sensory. I know that I have done this so often, and a friend of mine actually just texted me the other day, and she said, oh my gosh, I just realized my son has always avoided playing on the swings. He's always hated it, and I've always encouraged him to do it because he just needed to overcome his fear. And she said, now I realize that he just has a really small vestibular cup, and I didn't realize that I was working against his sensory system. We all have done this inadvertently just because we haven't been aware of sensory up until now. So think of those ways that inadvertently you've been working against it and how we can switch that. One student of ours named Stephanie, she had a really powerful experience of working with the sensory system instead of against it. And at the time she came to us, her son was 10 years old and eating 15 foods. He was very particular. And I know a lot of you guys who are listening to this can really relate to this. She had tried everything, and they were both so frustrated. She tried bribing, she tried forcing, she tried incentivizing, she tried everything to get him to eat more foods, but it just was not happening until she realized that it was a sensory need, and she was able to link it back to that. So she and her son were able to talk about it and support his sensory system and work together to support it. And sure enough, a week later, he ate 2 new foods on his own. He was willing to try those things because he wasn't having to fight against his mom as well as his sensory system. And when we don't feel that pressure to fight against other people, we're more likely to open up and accept and try new things. And sure enough, a couple weeks later, he introduced a couple more foods. So the more we're able to work with it, the better the results will be for us.
That brings us to step 4, which is creating a plan. Now, you guys already know that Wendy and I have sensory kids, and we both are very busy. And the last thing we want is for a sensory diet to feel like another thing on our to-do list. So it's very important to us to teach you a system that actually works and is doable, meaning you're going to stick with this thing. And that's really where the difference between a sensory diet versus a sensory solution comes into play. So we really like the word sensory solution opposed to sensory diet just because it sort of has a negative connotation with it for some people. But truly, a sensory solution is adaptable, meaning that it changes as you and your child need it to change every single day, and that the activities that you're using are practical, that they are actually helping your child. So you're seeing a positive change with these activities. You're seeing them sleep better or eat better or focus better. And you didn't just do it just to do it. And that they're simple. So this is really what our intention is. And as you're creating your plan, this is what we want to focus on. If you're finding that it feels hard, then we need to readjust and look at it again. So this is another great place to get out a pencil or a paper and write down how you can begin to put your plan into place and offer this support. So the very first step is to think in advance. And actually, for these 3 bullets that you see listed here, this is really the overarching theme across the board, is to think about this in advance. This is all about creating that plan, right? We don't create a plan in the middle of our child being scared to get on the swing at the playground necessarily, or having a meltdown, or gagging at their food. It's so much more helpful, and you will feel so much more peaceful and calm in those moments when they do happen, when you've thought this through ahead of time. So the first thing we want you to do is thinking about that when. When are you seeing your child have sensory behaviors? Is there a specific time of day? There may or may not be, but oftentimes we do see patterns that it's often in the morning or before bed or during school hours or after school hours. It could be all the time and random, but it's important to write those times down and see if there are any patterns so that you can anticipate having some sensory activities ready to offer, and even having your child go to those sensory activities on their own in the future. So if you know that your child is done when he comes home from school, like he has a meltdown every single day because he's held it together, all of his sensory needs all day, and maybe that means that he's having a hard time focusing on his homework now. Maybe that means he's melting down or lashing out at his siblings. Then you can have a quiet spot for them to go, maybe a sensory tent, maybe a tight spot behind the couch, depending on what his needs are. And the awesome thing is your child can learn that and just start to do that on their own once you have set that up for them. So in the same way, we want you to think about where the sensory behaviors are happening. Is there a location that's common? Is it typically in a store? Is it typically at home or in school? Again, making a list of all of the different behaviors that you think are related to sensory will really help you start to see these patterns. And then the last thing we want you to think about as you're creating your plan is, how can you actually support these needs? So that's where the step 3 comes in, the activities that you've thought about to actually support those needs. So if you know that it's a sensory bin that really helps calm your child down, or if you know that you're going to use a sensory bin to help your child not be as sensitive to different textures, to help them start wanting to touch things or to eat a wider variety of food, you're going to want to think about preparing a sensory bin in advance. You're going to want to think about having some different textures for them to play in before you actually provide them with that activity or that opportunity to do that. So let's take this a step further, and we want to get really specific and think about how we can make this work for you. So one of our favorite tricks is to keep a sensory bag or a bin in your car, in your home, or both. And what we want you to do is we want you to think about what your child's specific sensory needs are. Which cups are overflowing? Which cups need filled, and what kinds of things can you put in that bin for them. And this is a great way to keep it doable. So again, you've thought this through, you've put in the work ahead of time. So if your child has a cup that's overflowing and they don't like loud noises, you may have some headphones in there for them. If your child loves loud noises, you may put a harmonica in your sensory bin, not headphones. So you want to think about matching what you put in that bag to your child's needs. This was a really exciting tip for one of our students, Lisa, to learn, because Lisa was really struggling at the airport, a place that she found herself in often with her son. He had cups that were overflowing with hearing and with vision, and he would just have a very difficult time following directions in the airport. He would have tantrums in the airport, and it really was a nightmare situation for her. Once she got to this place and she understood that those behaviors were linked to different sensory systems, and she knew how to support those sensory systems, she was able to pull together a plan and create this bag to meet his needs. And guess what? After she did that, she found herself on her first successful flight with her son, and they were in the airport all the time. So this was a really big moment for her and was really life-changing for Lisa.
So what do you think? This is our sensory solutions process. And we want to know, does it feel doable to you? Think in your heart, does this feel a little bit different from a sensory diet? We want to take a minute to give you a few examples of how this has helped a few other people in their lives. So first, we want to tell you about Jagger. At the time his mom came to us, she was a student who had learned this process of the sensory solutions way. And she said, before I just felt helpless. My son cried at the sight of food or even just sitting at the table. He was even at one point hospitalized for not eating. We were told that it was a learned behavior and that we just had to go home and fix it. At that point, he and I both cried every single day. I was just at a loss. And she said, after applying the sensory solutions concepts, she's able to say, now things are so much better. We don't fight over food, and I get him now. And we had another similar experience with another friend of ours who had twins that we're going to call C and P, and they were very active twin boys who were 3 years old at the time. And she came to us and said before her boys were having terrible tantrums and meltdowns in public places all the time. And in addition to that, when they would go swimming or get wet or anything, they didn't want to have any clothing on them. They couldn't tolerate the feeling of wet clothing. So wearing swimsuits was not an option. This only became a problem when she and her husband decided they wanted to take a family vacation to a water park where she knew her boys would be around a lot of people. She knew there would be a lot of stimulation, and she knew they were going to get wet and they couldn't be naked. So she had prepared for it, just like Alicia was saying, and had her bag of tricks, and she had a plan. And she said, we went on a family vacation with no meltdowns. We were able to hold the kids tight. We gave them sunglasses and hats to cover their eyes and shield their small visual cups. And when it got noisy, we were able to just hold them and calm their bodies down. And in addition to that, they even went swimming with no problem with swimming suits. So it's these little things really that other people might say, oh my gosh, your kid went swimming with a swimsuit, like no big deal. But for us, we know how big of a deal this is to our kids because we know how hard it is for them to work through those things. But having that plan and including our kids in it really makes it so powerful in our lives. So our goal here is to make sensory simple to address in your daily life so you and your child can enjoy time together in various settings.
Yeah, and just the way that we saw with Ashley and her son Jagger, and with our twins C and P. So we want to think about why you really showed up today. You know, Wendy and I, because we have been in your shoes, we know that you finally want to understand your child and how sensory affects their life. We also know that you know there is hope for working through the challenges and behaviors that your child faces, and to move past just trying to survive and instead learn how to proactively help your child. So it's time. The time is now to face those tantrums, meltdowns, and other confusing behaviors without fear and with a solid plan to help your child work through the sensory differences. Can you imagine what it would be like to take out the constant guesswork and frustrations and being able to actually know how to help your child when they are facing a sensory challenge? This can be your reality too. And we mean that because we've seen these steps work over and over again with kids with all sorts of minor to more complex sensory needs. This plan is the culmination of our textbook education, but it's made realistic for real life. This is where we take a step out of our professional roles and make it real for parents, just like you, because we get it as moms and because this is what we've had a lot of practice doing with other parents. I will tell you with hand on my heart that we believe in this plan with all our hearts because of the unique OT teacher mom combo that it was created out of. It is based on that textbook research as well as the realities of implementing it into a daily routine. It isn't just some theory or assignment given for you to try out. It is tried and tested and lived in our own homes and the dozens and dozens of homes of others that we have helped. It works, and we are happy to see it work for you too. So the obvious question is, how do I make this work quickly and easily without stress? Well, we have made this easy. We know how valuable your time is. You are busy parents with so much on your plate. We're here to help take that load off your shoulders so that you can focus on being the parent that you want to be. This is a crossroads for you. It is up to you what you do next. You can absolutely go on your own, do the research. We've given you a great start, a framework. But if you want to dive into learning the ins and outs of all of these steps and get a really solid understanding of what sensory processing is, how it affects your child, tons of sensory activity ideas and how to match those up to the sensory behaviors with a lot of hand-holding from two experts with two unique and different backgrounds that allow us to cover every sensory challenge from tantrums to picky eating, then we'd like to introduce you to our online class, Sensory Solutions. Sensory Solutions is, again, the culmination of all of our professional experience, but we also bring in what we have learned as moms to make this easy and simple for you. We share all the tips and tools that we use in our daily homes and do this so that you don't have to spend the hours researching and days in frustration and feeling stuck trying to figure everything out, and can start to turn things around immediately. And it really does start happening that soon for our students.
Absolutely. So Sensory Solutions is a comprehensive program that makes sensory manageable for you and your child on a daily basis. And honestly, when students in this class start to use the tools that we've talked about, they've gone from being overwhelmed and frustrated to being confident and supportive of their child's sensory needs. They actually say that they're surprised at how quickly the behaviors and frustrations and tantrums start to change. The changes really are incredible. And we just had somebody email us the other day and said, hey, I just want to tell you guys that we have bought and researched and spent so much time and money on so many other things and found them all to just be junk because they didn't apply to me. And so they were asking, how is this different? And honestly, Sensory Solutions is very different because of that, because it's us being in your shoes, and we've done all that research. We've been in those shoes. And this is where it all comes together in a way that is actually going to take you from point A to point Z with no gaps in between. So how does this work? The class is 100% online to make it easy for busy people like you. We know that you're busy and we know that you have a ton on your plate. So similar to an online college course, you'll have access to the website where you can log in to watch the videos whenever it's convenient for you. The videos are already there. You can log in and watch them at midnight, your time, if that's what you want, or at 5 in the morning, your time, if that's what you want. You can do it during nap time, after bedtime, whenever is best for you. So our class is centered around the 4-step process that we outlined today. And this is something that Alicia and I have developed, and we expand on this so much more in the class. Because these steps we found have really built that foundation that lady was talking about. She said, I've gathered information here and there, but it just doesn't fit. It just doesn't apply. This is where we go step by step to build that foundation of a really solid understanding of how your specific child processes sensory information and the exact tools that you will need to address it. This is what makes this course different from anything else that you'll find. So what it looks like is we've broken it up into 3 different modules. Module 1 is digging into the sensory system, and this is where we uncover how the sensory system works, how to know when it's off, and why most behavior strategies just aren't working. And we show you that very clearly there. Then we move on to Module 2, which is understanding and supporting the sensory system. This is where Alicia really works her magic. She takes her therapy background and she makes it relatable and easy to digest, just like she did here. And we dive into each of the 7 senses so you have a super clear understanding of all of them. We're going to eliminate all the guesswork and show you exactly which activities can be used to support each of those different senses. Then we move into Module 3, which is the big picture and the solutions for your child. And this is one of the most powerful modules. And this is where you take all that information and you make it work for you and your child in your home on a daily basis. And this is where other things just can't compare. This is where some of the biggest changes happens because we are making it specific to your needs and your child's needs and what works for you. For instance, I am not a scheduled person, but Alicia is, and we're able to understand that. And she and I are both able to make sensory solutions work in our home. We understand that everybody has different preferences, and that's what we outline in that module. So what will you get out of the class? Honestly, that's up to you, but other students have told us that they get so much. We've talked a little bit about, some of the students said that they have a happier home, a better relationship with their spouse because they're not fighting about how to handle these different behaviors. They have a more focused child in school, less frustration, more connection, so many things. This is where we really take everything that we know and have experienced and we give it to you here to simplify your process so you don't have to go through all the things that we've gone through. So when you join the Sensory Solutions class, you'll learn how to clearly understand and identify what your child's sensory needs are. You'll understand exactly how and when to help them in avoiding those rough moments, and how to improve their sensory processing rather than fighting against it.
And what are you going to get? We want to be really specific here so that you know exactly what you'll have when you purchase the class. So there are 11 lessons between the 3 modules, and we cover step 1 in the first module, and steps 2 and 3 are in module 2. And then the last step is all in that 3rd module. And that's all broken down between these 11 lessons that you can watch via video, and you can also read in downloadable and printable PDFs. We have over 10 handouts and worksheets and printables. Everything is 100% online, and you have 1 year access. So this is an independent study. This means you can get on and go through the class whenever you want to. You can take as long as you need to go through the class, and you can also share this with your spouse and any caregivers that are working with your child. We want to take a second and highlight just a couple of these handouts because it's probably one of our students' favorite aspects of the class. And probably at the top of that list is the sensory behavior checklist. So the sensory behavior checklist is a huge list of all the different types of sensory behaviors that you may see, organized by each sense, and whether it's from a cup that's overflowing or a cup that's too empty. So we organize that and lay that all out for you completely. We also have a huge sensory activity bank where you can look under each sense and find tons of different ideas for addressing that sense, and different sensory planners depending on what you want to plan for your sensory diet. We have charts and planners and checklists to make that all really simple for you and pull out all of the important details in a really organized way from the lessons. Now, I know some of you are here because you have a child that is a picky eater, and that is addressed under our oral system in Module 2, but this is an extra lesson where I lay out a framework for addressing picky eating across the board and laying a foundation for healthy eating habits and really getting to the bottom of picky eating. We also have a special mini course loaded for you right into class. So this mini course has 3 additional lessons in it and a workbook. And it's really about getting to the heart of what sensory processing is in a really easy way for you with some additional worksheets to help you work through that. This is a great thing to share with spouses and caregivers as well, too.
And for those of you who decide to join this class by the end of this workshop, we want to give you a free copy of this ebook, Taming Tantrums. And this is something I'm super excited about because truly it's something very unique. I take my background in child development and special education and all the theoretical knowledge I have about behavior, and I combine it with everything I know about sensory and put it into here to show you exactly why sensory behavior is so different from other behaviors. I show you why it happens, how to address it, and how to even decrease it from happening so often. And this is something that is very, very unique, especially in the behavior world, because most behavior is very limited in the way that you can address it. And sensory is just so different, so different. And I address it all and give you all the tools here in this book. So if you join by the end of this workshop, you get a free copy of this book, which I am just so excited to share with you. So what do you think? Are you ready to create a sensory solution for your child? I know a lot of you are asking right now, what is the investment? So let's get into that. So this is not what you will be paying, but we want to show you the value of the things that you will be receiving. And this doesn't even cover all of it. Because honestly, in my personal experience, using a sensory solution has saved me a lot of time, saved me a lot of frustration, saved me so much heartache, and I can't put a value on those things. You know, another thing that it has directly done has saved me a lot of money with occupational therapy. My son was in occupational therapy for about 6 months, and I know for a fact that we were able to go through his occupational therapy sessions and actually maximize the time that we spent there because I was able to take what they were doing there and replicate it in a meaningful way at home rather than just taking those worksheets and kind of guessing at why they were happening or why I was supposed to do them at home. I was able to really understand what the OT was working on and bring that home and work on things here. It's just like any teacher will tell you, you know, homework is only to connect the classroom study to what you're doing at home. And when homework is done at home and reading is done at home, the child excels. And that's exactly what we can do here with the sensory solutions. It's not about avoiding occupational therapy, just like it wouldn't be about avoiding school altogether. It's about maximizing that time and the amount of money that you put into it to be able to make it completely worthwhile for you. And those are just some of the valuable things that sensory solutions can do for you.
And we also want to tell you that we do have a money back guarantee for 30 days. And we do this because we want you to feel as confident about this class as we do. We believe in sensory solutions with all of our hearts, and we know how tremendously effective it is. But we want you to feel confident in taking that step forward. So to do that, you will have that money back guarantee for that 30 days. If you get into class, you try these strategies, and you feel like they're not working for you. Your investment today is only $39, followed by 2 more installments of $39. Or you can take advantage of the one-time payment option, which brings that price down to $97. Now, either way, you are getting access to this entire course and all of the handouts, all of the modules that we've just walked you through, for an entire year. You can download these items, they are yours to keep, and you can access them on the course platform for at least a year, probably much longer than that though. Now, we do want to take a second and tell you that this is a very special early bird offer that we are offering to you because you are on the workshop here. This is not the price that you will see if you head to either of our websites, and it is only available for the next 5 days. So the one-time payment is normally $127, but we're giving you that special $30 off to make that $97, or the monthly installments are usually $49. Again, giving you that $30 off with $10 off per payment, bringing that down to. You can get either one of these options at yourkidstable.com/SS. Now, we want to tell you when you get to that page, you're going to have lots of information on there about class and more details if you're interested in reading that. But when you get down to the bottom of the page, you're going to see these two boxes. And you're going to pick which option works better for you and click that button that says Get It Now. Once you do that, you'll be redirected right to this page. This is the very next thing that you will see. And this is creating your account, which is what you will use to get into class. So this name and email and password that you use is exactly what you will use when you want to get into the classroom at any time of day or night. You will then come right to this page and put in your payment information. You have the option to use PayPal or use your credit card. Once you do that and you click purchase, you will immediately be logged right into class, and you will see that everything is loaded up right there for you, and you can start class as soon as you want to. Now, if you need help ordering or have any questions at all, please email us at sensorysolutions8@gmail.com. We will be happy to help you. Now, we are just about out of time. We are going to answer a couple of questions that we tend to get all of the time that we think will be really helpful for you. But we want to remind you that Wendy's special Taming Tantrum book is only included in joining the class if you join by the end of this workshop. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes left here, and we're going to get started with a couple of those questions.
So Alicia, I have a question from a lot of people who are wondering, is this for professionals and can I get CEUs from this?
So yes, as we've been talking, we created this class for parents, but we have had many different therapists and teachers, actually a wide variety of professionals take this class. So if you're watching this as a professional or are a parent and a professional, we do provide a certificate, which is for 4 hours for this Sensory Solutions class. It is not specifically CEU certified, but we have had many people over the last year use this without any problem with states all around the country. And printing out the course outline that we provide inside of class is also helpful to just turn in with that. And Wendy, I think I have a question I'd like to ask you that we get all the time. And that is, does this 4-step process, does our version of a sensory diet work with kids that have autism or ADHD or a lot of sensory needs?
That's such a good question. And I am a behavior geek. And so this is something that absolutely works with kids with all different kinds of abilities, and even verbal abilities. Some people have asked, does this help with kids? Can we do this with a child who's even nonverbal? The answer is yes. And Alicia and I have really catered this and built this in a way that it will meet a variety of needs. And a lot of the things that you see in your home that you feel are unique to your child are really just sensory related. And so if we can get to those sensory roots, so many of these other things will start to make so much more sense, and it will all come together. And so yes, we've had people in the class who have had children with ADD, ADHD, autism, nonverbal, so many things, and they've all been able to apply this to their child in a way that's very meaningful.
And at the same time, having kids at the opposite end of the spectrum. And the reason that we're able to cover such a wide variety of children is because we created this system to be so adaptable to meeting your child's needs. So even if your child doesn't have any diagnosis like my son, such as SPD or ADHD, or even more significant sensory needs, this is still so effective for those kids as well, even if that means that your child isn't having meltdowns. My child does not have sensory meltdowns, and probably didn't have too many major tantrums outside of typical development stuff, but his needs, as I already told you, were more of just wild, aggressive, impulsive behaviors that when I was looking at through just a behavior lens, we weren't getting anywhere really, but a lot of frustration. So the class and these 4 steps really meet a wide variety of kids. Sorry to jump in there, Wendy.
No, I think it's great. And I think it's so true. You know, we tend to focus on just the most extreme sometimes. So it's good to really clarify that it goes for all abilities, for sure. Another question we get quite often, Alicia, which you can answer, is will these 4 steps and will this class replace occupational therapy?
So yeah, just to talk a little bit more about what Wendy was talking a few slides ago, the last thing we want anyone to think of is that this is a replacement for OT if OT has been recommended to your child or your child is in OT. But as Wendy was saying, we have seen in other students besides Wendy, that their time has been decreased. However, we also know that some children are not candidates for OT. They have to qualify. It doesn't mean that there aren't sensory needs there, though. We also know that there are some financial restrictions. Occupational therapy is $100 to $200 an hour, and it's just out of some people's budget, where this class might be a more affordable option. And we have found with many of our students, they were able to avoid going to OT because they were able to figure out how to meet their child's sensory needs at home. And again, we do have some people that live in places where there just isn't occupational therapy available. So I'm an OT. I love OT, and doing sensory integration, which is on a higher level in therapy, can be really beneficial. This class is great as a complement to, and in some cases works as a great alternative when it's not an option. And then I have a question for you, Wendy, and this is probably something we hear the most, but how much time will it take every week if you're moving through the class, which it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to get through the class? If you're taking 1 module per week, how long would it take you on a daily or weekly basis? How much time would somebody have to commit to it?
You know, Alicia and I have been offering this course for quite a while, and we've had hundreds of students go through it. And we've found that they find the most success when they dedicate 1 hour a week to the course, whether that's 20 minutes each night on the weekdays, or whether that's 1 hour on a Saturday or Sunday. 1 hour is really all that you need. And so if you can take 1 hour a week for even 3 or 4 weeks, then you should be able to get through all of the information really easily. It is very doable with even the busiest of schedules. We've had working moms, we've had stay-at-home moms, we've had occupational therapists, we've had so many different people in different walks of life be able to very easily manage this. And a lot of people have actually told us that they feel like they've saved time by taking this course, because one student told us specifically she used to stay up for hours after her kids would go to bed and research sensory differences and how she could help them. But with this course, she wasn't having to do that. And it also saves time during the day too, because you're not locked in these power struggles or sensory meltdowns or whatever it might be for your child. It saves a lot of time in other places. So sometimes it's just a trade-off, you know, a few videos for a tantrum. I can handle that. So another question we get quite often is, can my child have multiple sensory needs or needs in multiple different sensory areas?
So absolutely, yes. As we're going through the workshop, we sometimes are focusing on one particular sense to illustrate a point, but it's very common for our children to have some cups that are filled just right most of the time, but then to have a cup here and a cup there that's overflowing, or one cup that's overflowing and one cup that needs filled, or it could be all of the cups or most of the cups that need filled or need emptied out. It's so variable and so unique to every single child, their specific needs. For sure. And that's exactly what, again, we really try to highlight in class. And when we walk through Module 2, there's a lot of information in that module because we look at each one of the senses and what it looks like for that cup to be overflowing, what it looks like for that cup to be underflowing, understanding how that sense works. And then I give you some of my therapy power tools, we call them. So some of the most powerful sensory activities that you can use. And you also will find demonstrations of how to use some of those therapeutic sensory activities in your home. But you'll, again, know which of those cups you're targeting and why. Wendy, I also, I think we have just a few minutes left here. And I just want to remind everybody that if you're listening to this right now, we are going to answer just 2 more questions. I have 2 really important questions that I know a lot of people ask for Wendy, and then we'll be signing off. If you want to grab that Taming Tantrums book, you can head to yourkidstable.com/SS. And also look for the button in the either above your box if you're on a cell phone, or to your right if you're on your computer, and you should have a box there to go ahead and click to join the class, and it'll take you right to class. So Wendy, our second to last question is, what do I do if my child refuses sensory activities?
This is such a good question, and one that we definitely get a lot. Just like we talked about in our top 3 tips, sensory can never be forced, and it's really important to never do that. What we would definitely recommend doing is including your child in looking for sensory activities that feel good to his or her body, that they might be drawn towards. And so asking, it seems like we need to do more activities during the day before you go to school. That seems to help your body a little bit more. So what types of things would you like to do? Maybe giving 4 or 5 options, or 3 or 4 options, depending on how old your child is. But giving them that power to be able to choose what it is that they want to do is a really huge aspect of getting them their participation and their buy-in, really, to doing these sensory activities. And I find the more we're open with our kids about their sensory needs and their sensory system, the more willing they are to participate in it with us. For instance, my son knows about his sensory needs. We all know about our sensory needs in our family. And so we're very open with it. And so my son, the other day, he told me, he says, "Mom, I think my body needs to go swing right now." I said, "Okay, that's great." And having him take charge of those things is really powerful because he understands how he's able to regulate his sensory system. And that just comes by using this sensory solution in a meaningful and powerful way. And that's something that we really encourage in Module 3, where we cater it to you and your child and the specific needs in your home. And that's where the power comes in. And there won't be as much refusal when there is both ends are really contributing to making this decision.
Yeah, and at the same time, too, that, we know that for some of the senses that have overflowing cups, that there's a way to desensitize them to different senses. Sometimes there's a balance between supporting those needs, and you heard us give many examples today about providing sunglasses or hats for bright lights. But there's also a way, particularly with a sensitivity to touch, to some degree with smell, and with the vestibular system, to really start to break down that sensitivity in a way that your child feels supportive, but starts to help them process that sense even better. So we spend a lot of time talking about that in Module 3 so that you can feel comfortable starting to slightly push your child out of their comfort zone so that they aren't so sensitive to some of those forms of input that they are receiving. Mm-hmm. Now, last question, Wendy, can you tell us how you would explain what sensory is to a child? So you just talked about how you have this open dialogue with your son, but how did you get to that point, and how would you recommend telling other parents to talk to their children about their sensory needs?
It can really feel scary to explain sensory to a child because it's this abstract concept that we don't even understand ourselves very much. So one way that I simplify everything. My life has to be simple or else I get frustrated. So one way I like to think of it is just the way that our body works. For instance, my body doesn't like dairy. I personally love dairy. I could eat cheese and ice cream all day long if I was in control, but I'm not. My body is in control, and my body won't let me eat those things. So I can say my body doesn't like dairy, and that's a true statement. And so I like to apply that same concept to the sensory system. I can have my son say, my body needs more movement, and that's a true statement. And that's his way of saying he needs more proprioceptive input. Or he can say, my body doesn't like that smell, which is again true. And it's not him being particular, it's his body exhibiting certain preferences or aversions to different things. So if we can simplify it in that way, it takes a lot of the pressure off of kids about feeling weird or feeling different or feeling like they need to change, but really puts all of the emphasis on their body, which is exactly what is causing all of these things.
Yeah, and I think that there's an overarching theme throughout our whole course that really talks about how to discuss sensory. And when you will have such a better understanding of what sensory is, and we give some really great examples of how the sensory system works that can be really relatable to children. So you will find that as you're going through this course and as you understand it better, that language is going to come very naturally to you. Now, we are out of time for this workshop, and we are so excited that you took the time to join us. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email us at sensorysolutions8@gmail.com. And if you're ready to join Sensory Solutions and start making these changes in your child's life, then you can click the button that says to join now, or you can go right into your browser and click yourkidstable.com/SS, and you will grab that special Taming Tantrums bonus that Wendy has included. Thank you all so much. We are so happy that you were here with us.